Hi, Carla. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Hi,
Thanks for
Johannes.
joining. So, this is the final live stream before Carla's course begins finally this Sunday on the Egyptian mind. 6 lectures in total and 6 ebooks that come with it. So, you don't have to read everything. But tonight, what we're going to do is I'll introduce the course briefly. I'll just say this begins this Sunday if you want to do the live cohort, I think not so synchronous study. So if you want to be in a Zoom meeting with Carla 2 hours every Sunday for 6 weeks, then you should join that tier, the live cohort. If you don't have time for at least, let's say, 2 or 3 of the seminars, just take the asynchronous study. And there's also, I think, 1 or 2 left with private dialogues with Carla. So even if you've never heard anything about Egyptian philosophy or metaphysics, etc., this is the course for you because it's an introductory course. I'll link to the enrollment page in a second, and Carla will give us sort of a crash course on the superficial look at Egypt and what it means to go a bit deeper. Now, thanks to Carla, I was allowed to read again. I had all the reasons to do this again. I read Jean Baudrillard again, and I was struck how similar it is what good old Jean says about Ramses II to what Carla keeps talking about. And of course, I also read a bit of Hegel on why the human spirit really begins in ancient Egypt. All right, no further ado, Carla, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Johannes. Thank you for having me. And I'm thrilled to be part of Halcyon Academy and to start teaching my course soon. And for today, I wanted to share, I call it a cultural starter kit, sort of a crash course on the ancient Egyptian culture, because I really feel that there's so much floating around out there that what people think they know about ancient Egypt has almost nothing to do with what their civilization or their culture was really about. And there's several reasons for this. And once I get done with my little rundown or crash course, we will see why it doesn't work, how we usually approach ancient Egypt, which is through their history, through their monuments, and through their iconography. And that's all the wrong ways how to do it. And I will explain you why. So what I'm doing in the course and what I'm going to do right now is to actually understand or describe the ancient Egyptian culture from within their own cultural logic and not to look from the outside. So the first thing that I feel and they thought you should understand about their cosmos and about their entire reality is that they imagined their cosmos as a vulnerable and a cosmogenic cosmos that constantly had to be renewed and was also constantly threatened by outside chaos and outside forces, and also had to be imbued with life from an outside divine system. So life was not inherent in this cosmogenic for cosmos. And when I say cosmogenic, it means that they believed that the cosmos was constantly being reborn in a constant process that never stopped. So there was not a big bang that happened that we move away from in a linear movement. This was something that was in a sort of suspended time frame, constantly happening and had to be constantly renewed by us living in this temporal sphere of matter and existence. And this point in time, it's not time in the sense that we use it, was called a Zep Tepi, or the first occurrence. This was the source of everything, the source of all creation, and the source of this constant cosmogenic renewal. And from this one source, the one, all metaphysical, everything metaphysical and everything that constitutes matter would originate from. And there was also an all imbuing principle that was originating from there, which was Ma'at. And Ma'at has several translations. It's justice, it's truth, it's balance, it's cosmic order. And it is the one principle that their entire culture was geared towards. Every pharaoh, every citizen, they all served Ma'at. And Ma'at is this cosmic order, this all-imbuing principle that had to be upheld to protect and renew and basically maintain this vulnerable cosmos in this constant cosmogenic process. And they believed that we, be it human beings, everything we see in this manifested world is a blossom on a single vine. So everything comes from this one metaphysical force. And this is all bound together in a sort of interconnected fabric of reality ordered by the principle of Ma'at. And this is also a reason why everything we look at in ancient Egypt constantly looks the same. Their iconography doesn't change, their buildings don't change, and their basic outlook, even their politics and their mortuary beliefs, nothing in ancient Egypt ever really changes. Of course, there are inner processes, and we will see in the mortuary literature and also in some aspects of the culture that did change, but their goal was to keep it unchanging because everything in their culture was an expression of this one underlying principle. And this is why when we look at their architecture or we look at their iconography, it looks so weird because it's extremely stylized, is extremely canonized, and it cannot be understood as an artistic expression. It's an expression of their underlying worldview, where everything had to be sort of depicted in a formalized way. And when you look at the iconography of the pharaoh, it's the very same, let's say the striking of the enemy. It's the very same in the very first palettes that we have from 3200 BC as it is in Ptolemaic times. So the pharaoh is doing the exact same thing. And this is defeat cosmic chaos, for instance. So this iconography had to stay consistent throughout thousands of years. And that's what seems so confusing about the ancient Egyptian culture at first glance, because you feel like, why did they depict the same thing over and over in this strange canonized way? And this is the reason. And for the same reason, they also did not see themselves as a historical civilization. Famously, when the first Greeks came to Egypt and asked them about their history, they had very little to offer. They had a few king lists, but they did not have a continuous history, because they did not think that way. To them, continuous linear history was not important. The only thing that was important was what cosmogenically originated constantly from this one source. So when they told the Greeks that they were older than most civilizations, it didn't mean in a linear term, older. It meant that they considered themselves to be closer to the original state of the cosmos when it was first brought into being, and that they simply did not see themselves on any sort of historical timeline. So this is also a common misunderstanding about their culture. And another thing to know that's interesting is that this cosmogenic principle was mirrored in everything they built, including their temples, their pyramids, and their obelisks. So you have this one element in there that's the so-called Benben stone, or the pyramidion, that you have either symbolized through a hill in every temple, and the temple architecture also mirrored the first cosmic moment of creation, or you just have the little pyramid stone on top of an obelisk, or on top, obviously, on a pyramid, and they all symbolize this first primordial emergence of existence, the so-called Benben or pyramidion, and this is something that you will find throughout their culture. And the next important thing is that the culture can not only not be understood historically, but also never be understood literally. So a common mistake is to look at their iconography and you see an animal-headed god, or you see strange stylized symbols, and you feel that this is what they actually tried to express. But we have already learned they were not a culture that expressed themselves artistically in that way. This is a mirror of their cosmological and religious principles. And what they also deployed a system that is called mythological thought, or fluid logic in Egyptology, or in anthropology, mythic thinking. This means that they themselves did not look at these symbols as an actual reality. They saw everything as a symbolic, interconnected system. So when you have a story like the myth of Osiris, where Osiris is dismembered and hacked into pieces, and then resurrected as a mummy, everything in this myth is to be understood symbolically. So we always have to look at the underlying analogical logic and not at the different literal elements of it. So in this case, we have to look at death as dismemberment in a metaphysical sense, and we have to look at the unification through the mummy as a transformational metaphysical moment, and not as something that necessarily was only depicted in its physicality. And this fluid logic, as some Egyptologists called it, is to be found everywhere. So we go back to the beginning, how they imagined the cosmos. Also, the entire cosmos to them was something that was completely interconnected in one metaphysical whole, one fabric, framing our reality as a temporary occurrence that constantly had to be cyclically renewed. This leads to different time concepts. This is also something that is often misunderstood about ancient Egypt. They had completely different concepts of time. Not only were they not a historical culture and looked at reality differently from a metaphysical standpoint more than from a material standpoint, they also had different time concepts. One of these time concepts we've already seen, this is the first occurrence of cosmic creation, which was in some sort of suspended state, constantly happening. And most of their rituals and most of their, I am reluctant to call it magic, but most of their magic spells, everything is rooted in this first occurrence, in this Septepi. They had two other time dimensions. One is the cyclical time dimension of Nechech, which is symbolized by the sun. That's the time dimension we're in, that we exist in, that all matter exists and unfolds in and has to be constantly renewed. And then there is a suspended time sphere, which is called Jet, and symbolized by Osiris. Osiris, his entire existence as being the undead, which is in a way still alive, is again a symbol for the suspended time sphere that the sun has to be united with in order to renew this cosmogenic universe that we live in. And these different time concepts are also the key to understanding their afterlife and what happens to us after we die. So they believed that death was a disintegration of matter and of the elements that make up our existence here, and then a transformation on this other temporal time realm or time sphere, the suspended time. So within that logic, all of the spells that you see, everything you see in their mortuary literature is geared towards this transformation. So it's all about enabling you to make this transformation, go through this liminal realm that is the netherworld or the afterlife that is guarded and looked over by Osiris, and then reach the suspended time and the afterlife. And another big misunderstanding is the pyramids and how dominant they were in the culture. The pyramids were built very early on in the first dynasties, around 2700 BC, and they did not have the cultural impact that everybody thinks they had. I mean, of course, they were important monuments, but they stopped building them. There were a few more attempts in the Middle Kingdom hundreds of years later, but it was not the great effort or the great center of their culture as we think it is today. What was culturally extremely influential were the so-called pyramid texts that appeared in the later pyramids, which are really small and now reduced to piles of rubble, basically. But they started appearing in the fourth and fifth dynasties. And here we have fully formed afterlife texts that enable the soul to transform and do exactly what I just described and pass over the horizon that is non-existent and pass into the so-called afterlife. And one of the greatest changes in their culture was exactly in these afterlife texts. So they moved then in the Old Kingdom from the pyramids to the so-called coffin text. They moved in the coffin, and then they moved into the so-called Book of the Dead, which is then in the end only a small papyrus scroll, which also tells us that the afterlife was not only something that could be achieved by a king, it was throughout their history, it was something that could be achieved by more and more people, because all you needed was an intact mummy where the whole process of transformation and mystic union of Osiris and the sun god took place for the renewal of life. And you needed this compilation of spells that first appeared in these so-called pyramid texts, which are the oldest corpus of texts that we have from ancient Egypt, which led famous archaeologist Jan Assmann to speculate that there was a form of immortality almost for everyone, because the ancient Egyptians were masters of reduction and of minimalism. So he said basically you could get a relatively cheap mummification by drying yourself out in the desert. You could get a small compilation of texts and you were good to go for the afterlife. This is also something that most people don't know. They think this was all geared towards the pharaoh, and that is not so. And the one thing we need to learn about this compilation of spells and the texts is that they were believed to have power of transformation, power to bring things into being. And they believed the same about the writing system themselves. Both the language, which had to be spoken, so it had to be spoken language, effective speech as we call it, to be powerful, or the written words were believed to have massive power. So this brings us also to the power of hieroglyphs and their whole writing system, which they believed was given to them by the god Thoth, the god of wisdom himself. So they did never claim to have conceptualized their culture themselves. They believed it was given to them by a divine being, which was Thoth in this case. So everything they expressed that had any sort of cultural impact was in their language. It's not in their monuments. The monuments, they served a purpose. It's not in their iconography, because that all served this higher purpose of Ma'at and these cosmogenic principles. But if you really want to meet ancient Egypt, you have to go through their literature, through their texts and their writing, because that's what they deemed the most important expression of their culture. And surprisingly, this could be anyone. So they believed that anyone capable of putting together so-called nefamedu, beautiful words, beautiful letters, could write them down or have them written down by a scribe, and could therefore become immortal. So a peasant, there is a famous text called The Eloquent Peasant, a peasant from the field, or let's say a common priest, could immortalize themselves by composing beautiful language and expressing their culture in some sort of way. So the eloquent peasant, for instance, expressed the importance of Ma'at for everyday life, and how everything you see in their social order, in their religious order, was geared towards maintaining Ma'at. So that's a very, very famous text, which was famously brought forth by a peasant from the field. And then there is, for instance, a lament of a priest whose name I can't pronounce. It's like this long. And he talks about the horror and his fears of, because he obviously lives through a time, because Egypt had times of decline where they were conquered, or the political system was breaking down. And he expressed very movingly how this concept of a vulnerable cosmos that was constantly threatened by outside forces was a lived reality to them. So this is where we meet them in their actuality. And in my course, I will show a lot of these original sources and a lot of these original texts where we will really meet ancient Egypt for how they saw the cosmos and how they felt about it, how they conceptualized it in their own minds. And that's the big difference. Usually we approach this culture from the outside, through their monuments, through their history, and through all elements that were completely irrelevant to them, or just not important in how they conceptualize reality, their religion, and their entire outlook on life and death. And one last thing that I want to say is that ancient Egypt was also not a despotic hellhole, as it is often painted with slavery. Slavery was illegal. They had great labor laws. They even had a form of health insurance for laborers, and they had great equality laws. So Herodotus famously wrote that in ancient Egypt, all the roles were reversed, and the women were running the businesses and the men were sitting at home weaving cloth. And it's, of course, a little bit over the top, but the reality was that women could own businesses, they could get divorced, they had their own right of property, and they could get their right in a court of law. So it was, in my opinion, and also what the sources tell us, because we have legal documents, they show us that it was a very advanced civilization when it came to human rights and equality. And yeah, that was my rundown of everything.
Thank you very much, Carla. We have a couple of questions. One from Marin, who's already enrolled. I have many questions, Carla. So if no one steps up, I have so many questions that I'll ask. What I'll briefly do, though, is I'll just show the enrollment page for everyone if you haven't enrolled yet. So here's the link to enroll, friends of the sun. Not unimportant. Why are so many people called Seth, Carla? Isn't that strange? Why is it Seth?
Yeah, Seth is a ambiguous figure because, of course, he's a god of the desert and of destruction and potentially chaos. But he also has a protective role. So sometimes we find him on the sun bark protecting the sun god. So it is an ambiguous figure, like everything is ambiguous in ancient Egypt. So sometimes these destructive or dark forces could be used for good. So there was a tendency also in the New Kingdom to reimagine Seth or Seth, both spellings are right.
So I hope that Seth enrolls if he's listening. So we've got the Egyptian mind. This is the enrollment page. There's a couple of different ways to join the course. The first one is the temple auditor, asynchronous study. So that means you're lurking around in the secret hallways of the temple and in the mazes and labyrinths where you, scheme in darkness, in secrecy, and are enigmatically hidden from the all-seeing eye, while of course you get to listen to Carla and the discussion, etc., in the recordings. If you've got no time for the live cohort, that's the tier, that's the way to join the course for you. But if rather you'd like to stand in the light of day, the light of the sun, meaning that comes from the outside, then the inner sanctum, the live cohort, is for you. What this means is that beginning this Sunday, August the 16th, or rather I should use the British way of saying this, 16th of August. I'm adapting again to the American way of saying it because there's too many Americans. But it is the 16th of August, this Sunday. We begin at 6 p.m. Central European time, which is 12 p.m. Florida time, which is where Carla resides. She told me that most people are back by then from brunch, so this should be fine for all of you. And those of you who are in LA or San Francisco, anywhere along the West Coast, that should be 9 a.m. Am I right? Is that right?
Yes.
So that's good for you. That's just before you take off for brunch. It's 2 hours. Carla will present a sort of a brief summary of the lecture. That's basically an extra lecture at the beginning of every seminar. Because you've gone through the recording. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, to guide you through, because it is a lot of material, but yeah, we will go through the most important points and make sure that it all lands.
And after that, there's enough time, nearly 2 hours, for you to ask questions and just raise your thoughts with Carla and everyone else in the group. This is how I understand. This is how I understand that. And it usually is just a really brilliant, wonderful discussion. As many of our participants say, this is what university should have been, but wasn't. I think the difference is simply that the people who are around you, they just come because they want to learn. And that's a different approach than having to take something for credit or to, have an academic career, whatever people do with. What do people even do with Egyptology anyways? I mean, you see, it's wonderfully useless. It's useless knowledge, which is the best knowledge. Useless in the sense that it doesn't have any use value for you to use for anything, but it might very well change your life. If you've got it
is enriching knowledge. It really it does enrich your life, and it changes your outlook on many things, on your purpose, on life after death. That's the beauty of studying other cultures. It really has the potential to profoundly enrich and change you.
And let us not forget, if we're like Hegel, it is where spirit begins. This is why, because they negate life, as extraordinary as this sounds. But because they negate the immediacy of anything that's just given, and in doing so, spirit comes to itself. There's a secluded part to it that is not just the immediate immediacy of everyday life. So there are, if you have, I think there's 2 left of these maybe, private dialogues with Carla. That's the highest tier here, and she will organize it. There's payment plans, etc. as well. So there's so everything is detailed here. The live seminar schedule, the course curriculum, everything's listed up for you to the greatest detail that I was able to do. And it tells you everything that's going to happen in the course, all the lectures and seminar content, etc. So lectures are, for the most part, pre-recorded. That means you can listen to the first lecture now, read I can show you what it looks like on the inside as well. By the way, if you have questions for Carla, let us know in the chat, and we'll get to your questions in a second. So I'll show you what this looks like on the inside.
Yeah, Marin is asking how the wealth of the Nile contributed to sustaining the mythos and tensions of their hierarchical system for so long.
Yep.
And the answer is immensely. The Nile flood and the necessity for the Nile to flood and bring fertile silt, I think you call it, was what governed their entire concept of reality. Because of course, if the Nile flood did not come and bring this fertile soil, they would their entire country would turn into a desert. But they also were famously the I think they call it the corn chamber of antiquity. So the power later on in when the other empires started emerging, like ancient Rome, was through that massive output of grain that they could harvest, I think, up to 3 times a year. So they could produce a lot of grain, and they famously fed the ancient world out of Egypt. And that, of course, was a big part of their power, because don't forget, they had to import also a lot of things. They did not have any wood. They had to import a lot of other resources. So they were heavily dependent on grain and agriculture in their economy. And the fact that they were surrounded by desert, and the Nile was the only axis of life within that desert, completely shaped their outlook on the world and on their religion and reality. So how it sustained the hierarchical system, I would say, I mean, they were extremely, they were a society. There was they had a huge administration. So there was temple administration, there was a royal administration, and there were local administration. So there are a lot of funny letters where tomb workers are completely frustrated, and they have to send out these chain mail letters to 4 different people just to get a little bit of pigment or paint to paint a tomb. So I think the administration was brutal there. And of course, because there were a lot of resources to manage, but it is important to remember that in the hierarchy of ancient Egypt, the temples played a big role, because they were great landowners, they were big manufacturers, and they had a lot of power that also came from the Nile and from the agriculture. But
yeah, so I'll just a brief look inside. This is a welcome video from Carla. There's a link to a Discord server for anyone who joins in any tier. Here's the handout. That's just the first handout. 37 pages. And
the cosmology one is also, I think, a good one.
Yes. This one, you don't worry, you don't have to read everything. What you will
but
so, yeah, maybe tell them what they have to do.
And it's you will see when you scroll through, it's clearly structured, and you can start almost anywhere, and the part where you learn the basics to read hieroglyphs, it is in the very end. But that's up to you. It's no necessity, because to to explore hieroglyphs and hieroglyphic script, you don't need to know the language. Because it's a symbolic script, you can still go into the deeper metaphysical layers, or what they call metalinguistic text, by looking at the symbolic hieroglyphs in the spelling of every word. And that's what I do in the script. So you can see fascinating details right away. You don't have to learn and read a lot. You can basically jump to chapter 2 or 3 and already learn fascinating aspects of hieroglyphic writing without any prior knowledge. So if you look, for instance, at the spelling of different words around the hieroglyph of the heart or the hieroglyph of the scarab, or you look at the metaphysical spellings of words for death, you can immediately just scroll there and read fascinating details about their language. So you can really also pick and choose in that script what you want to learn. If you want to learn how to read an entire obelisk, you can scroll all the way to the end and you can learn how to read an obelisk, but it's really up to you. It's not necessarily building upon each other. It's a fun compilation, what I consider fun, of the best of hieroglyphs. It's a best of list, what I find the most fascinating. You can also just read about their funny puns. They loved word plays. And you can read about why they would cut hieroglyphs in half to render them harmless. There's a lot to find in there, and just bits and pieces that you can read independently from each other that are very fascinating. And there is no need for real deep knowledge of the language to explore that.
Great. So just briefly, the video files here, so you can go through them. And this is Carla lecturing. This is the third lecture, and there's always also a audio file. I'm not going to play it here, but if you want to, you can use the Teachable app once you're enrolled, and you can download everything to that app, so you don't need to stream it when you listen to this, maybe on the way to work, etc. So here's a question from Aljan. What are the pavilions leading into within the text? Do you know what that refers to?
Yeah, I think it's the baboon that you have actually everywhere, from the pyramid spells to New Kingdom texts. And the baboon is a symbol, or the animal of Thoth. And he was believed to symbolize the principle of Thoth, because in their knowledge, or in their worldview, the knowledge of hieroglyphs, hieroglyphic writing, and the wisdom that Thoth gave us, also the wisdom of magic, which means a way of basically modifying reality, or the fabric of reality. That is all symbolized in the baboon. So it's very important to access this kind of power and knowledge in a lot of their mortuary texts. That's why the pavian, or the baboon is everywhere to be found. It's a symbol embodying all of these principles of the god Thoth.
Great. If there are more questions, let us know now, because we're leaving soon. So I have a question. So you mentioned the pyramid isn't that important. For Hegel, it's very important. And what about the Sphinx?
Well, the Sphinx is, the pyramid was important, but not necessarily as a huge monument. Like I said, the Ben stone, the symbol of the pyramid, was very important and to be found everywhere. But because it was the first primordial mound of existence, but the pyramids themselves, the building of it, that you hear everywhere in mainstream documentaries, it was a very short period of their 1,000-year-long civilization. That's what I wanted to stress here. But as a symbol, it was important. But the Sphinx was a symbol of the pharaoh as a stand-in and a mediator between our world, the world of Necher, of cyclical time, of matter, and the divine world. So when you see Pharaoh as Sphinx, he's usually in his function as a mediator, offering the gods ma'at in exchange for life.
So here's what Hegel sees in the Sphinx.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a video on my channel on Hegel's aesthetics on Egypt, which I think is you know, it's extensive, so it should do it justice. He sees in Egypt, yes, spirit arising. Why? Spirit for Hegel is negativity. It's what, as he says in the preface to the Phenomenology of Spirit, the life of spirit does not shy away from death, from this unreality or Unwirklichkeit, etc. So it dwells with death. It actually faces death. Spirit is a negation, if you like, active negation. You can think of this, you know, how do you become conscious of yourself by simply saying no to someone, a certain request. You become more conscious of yourself. This is weird way of putting it, perhaps, maybe counterintuitive, but so spirit arises here, but it doesn't rise yet. And we can't blame the Egyptians for it, and Hegel doesn't do this, of course, but it doesn't yet rise fully to full transparency. And hence there is no full human form in their art, according to him. And so the Sphinx is symbolic for all of spirit in Egypt, because what you see here is the enigma that spirit is to itself in ancient Egypt. It is animal body, but human head trying to escape from it. Does that make sense?
Well, I think, yeah.
To itself, and once we get to the Greeks, the riddle of the Sphinx is, you know, what's the riddle again? What walks on 4 feet in the morning?
Yeah, that's Greek though. That's Oedipus.
Yes, but okay. Well, Hegel may not have known, but Hegel says that this is that the Greeks solved the riddle, even if they let's say adopt it and turn it Greek, is because what they see in it is that they don't yet fully they don't show the full human form. And the highest art is always where subject and object become one, and that isn't given. So Egypt remains the land of the symbol. It remains symbolic. It doesn't become ideal in that sense.
So I would say I can now both answer as a German and from the perspective of ancient Egypt. I think the word spirit that he uses is it the German word Geist? So not the personal spirit, not Seele, but Geist.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So in the ancient Egyptian sense, this is not something that you can separate from anything. That's the problem. In the Egyptian sense, Geist or spirit is something that is already perfect and ordered, coming from the first occurrence. So it does not have to perfect itself or go into or this evolutionary model is also very Western, because we think that there has to be an evolution towards something. The ancient Egyptian thought the other way around. It already was perfect. But the spirit did express and learn about itself, its own truth, through its expressions. So you could say the Sphinx is an expression, is a plenitude of the one, and it is a deeper informant on the underlying spirit. They would answer like this. It would say, in the plenitudes, you meet the truth about the all-imbuing underlying greater spirit that is Ma'at. So spirit is already ordered, spirit is already perfect, but the many expressions and the plenitudes are for us and for the cosmos itself to experience the truth of spirit. So technically, yes, you could say, but the Sphinx as a symbol did not have that task.
Well, it might. Well, that's another time to discuss. Perhaps it may not have had that task, but that's in a sense what the symbol ultimately symbolizes, is that it doesn't come to ideal human form, right? As the Greeks then achieved, for example. And so there's a certain entrapment of the human form in the animal body, and we can see this after. So what Hegel says is that Egypt remains to itself enigmatic.
No. I know. They were pretty clear in what they believed in.
Well, he
and
says
they
there's
knew.
no. Well, okay, yes, what they believe in.
It was actually pretty simple once you get like really within that cultural logic. It just looks from the outside strangely chaotic because it is so fluid. But
Right.
once you really get into it, it is fascinatingly simple.
Hegel conveniently assumes that in his age, that would be the early 19th century, spirit comes fully to itself. And it is the age of spirit, where spirit recognizes that the world is of its making. And so history shows itself to be rational and move. So it's not rational in terms of it's an underlying, there's no foundationalism, but history itself proves itself to be rational. And this is what spirit comes to recognize in the 19th century, and conveniently at the time of Hegel. So and he says it quite right in the philosophy of history, which is somewhere behind me. He says, I've seen the whole. Ich habe das Ganze gesehen. and so I very much appreciate what he sees. But what he does is, I don't have to agree with him, but what this allows us to look, it is basically universal history. Yeah, so spirit takes different forms. He moves from India to Egypt, then moves to Greece, and then you can bring it all together in the universal unfolding, where every single culture is sort of a step towards that greatest transparency of spirit to itself.
But I can sense an evolutionary system.
Well, it's not evolution. Evolutionary is chaotic and it's just coincidence, and that's Darwin. It just has no end. It's teleological, so it has an ultimate telos, and the telos is what some refer to as the end of history. Yes, where there is sort of an end state.
Oh, okay, I get it. So that, yes, but it does require some sort of progression from one state.
Yes, of course, towards freedom.
Yeah, so that is what does not work within the ancient Egyptian framework. There is no progression. There is only the cyclical, and there is the suspended. There is no progression. That is what is so often misunderstood and what drove the Greeks crazy, because that is where we sort of cannot wrap our mind around it. And also later Egyptologists despaired over this, because that completely different way of thinking and that completely different logic does not allow in a lot of these European concepts. It's not really compatible, because it's a completely different way of seeing the world.
Yes, so I agree with that, but it's very. I mean, you have to hand it to him. He's given. If you do believe that you are the prophet of spirit, then you end up. You have to. He has to make sense of everything, and he sort of achieved it. I have a different approach, which is one of memory, which is, I think, closer to even Assmann has this nice term, right? Nemo history or something. And
yeah, but that's for our civilization, not for them.
Yeah, but it would make sense even a lot of, but you have to look at where we are. So you have to sort of recollect what was, and not just collect it and let it gather dust or something. And Jean Baudrillard, so here's another question that's a bit easier perhaps. So when I was reading Baudrillard and listening to your lectures and everything on the mummy, that it was sacred. So I was wondering if, because Baudrillard makes very strong, which is very unusual, let's say, for someone who's officially a Marxist, or at least post-Marxist, lefty French Parisian intellectual, which clearly he wasn't. I mean, he just knew, things that he had to do to have a job. But he talks about a hidden symbolic order. He talks about the hidden dimension that is known to them or implicit for them, so they understand it. But for us, it's foreign. And so I was wondering if perhaps we think of we imagine the mummy as scary, as a not just scary, as a outright an object of horror and fear.
A reanimated corpse, or like a
Like a
corpse.
zombie. Basically, it's a zombie. Because that what we're actually scared of is that hiddenness, is that non-transparency, is something that's not available to us. So you see, Hegel tries to make everything transparent. Now you have 20th century looks a bit different. Would you say that there's something to that or not? I mean, that's not what Baudrillard is. Is what I thought. Maybe that.
Yeah, I read your article on Baudrillard, and I thought it was brilliant, and I thought his observations are very accurate in what he says. And the mummy starts decaying the minute it is taken out of this ordered cosmic framework or existence. The way how we fumble with it and sort of try to restore it, and it's all really brilliant in what he observes. And that is also this fear of the hiddenness that is what is inside the mummy, that I would argue is it contains everything that our culture, our civilization does not provide for us for a life after death. So there is this whole potential of we need to prepare for something that is happening after death. And that's what the mummy reminds us of. Like there is a need, there is an urge, because that's what the ancient Egyptians believed. You have to prepare for the afterlife. You can't just go at it and hope for the best. There is a particular and very meticulous preparation necessary. And that's what we see in the mummy. There is a lot of cultural effort that goes into this. And it gives us this anxiety thinking, oh my God, we just perish. We do none of this preparation. So what is hidden in there is an entire cultural engine that was geared towards providing an entire afterlife for people. And we don't have that. So we live in an absence, in a lack of something that this mummy mirrors back to us was once existent. And that is anxiety inducing. And that's the hiddenness, because we can tell that we have no access to this. But what does that mean? Does it mean we're not prepared to die?
They had the sacred mummy, or a sacred vessel, as you always say, and we have zombies. That's what we have.
Yeah.
That's what our culture has come up. That's one of the figures of modernity, is the mummy.
We have nothing. Zombie. Exactly. Yeah. We have nothing but the physicality and the absence of life. That's all we have. That we don't have much better concepts, and maybe we have some sort of paradise, but those are all disputed. So we don't have very much to go on when it comes to life after death, and that is horrifying. And then you find another culture that seems to have all the answers, but we don't have them. That's why throughout pop culture, the mummy was reanimated, and people tried to talk to it and say, tell us, do you know from the other side? Because as Asman said, death is the ultimate initiation, also in ancient Egypt. It's the ultimate initiation that we could ever encounter. It's the greatest mystery of all. We don't know what's on the other side. And the mummy reminds us that there might be knowledge that we need in order to encounter this initiation. There might be preparation we need. What if we are not ready? And that's all enwrapped in this one symbol too.
And it comes back to haunt us from the rolling hills of holy wood. So here is again the enrollment page. We have to end it now. So thank you so much, Carla. I'll just mention a few things. Everyone if you're just joining in now, listen back to the entire lecture. Carla first lectured on an appropriate approach to Egypt, and this is what her entire course will be on. So we begin, if you want to join us live, this Sunday, and this then would be I'll just show you what this looks like. Click here, and you click enroll now. It's quite simple, and then it takes you over to the enrollment page. You just type in your details, etc. So, or if you don't have time for the seminars, just be a lurker, hide in the digital mazes and listen to the videos and print out the handouts, and you have what they call lifetime access. Or if you'd like to take additional private dialogues with Carla, just to dive a bit deeper even, then this is for you. Just again, click here. Very simple. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing, Carla?
I only see, I saw a few questions in the chat, and I can just give a very quick answer.
Yeah.
There's why did the scarab beetle feature so much in their society? That is also part of lesson 1 with the hieroglyphs. Why the scarab, which was a symbol for becoming and for the many manifestations of reality, and also a symbol for self-renewal, because the scarab buried the dung ball, and then the little baby scarabs would come out of the desert sand from the buried dung ball. So it was a symbol of self-renewal. So it had many functions in their society. And then somebody asked about consciousness and
this one,
and how that is a very good question, because there was a principle called Zia, which was perception or awareness of Ma'at, and that higher perception of awareness was, for instance, something that was given specifically to Pharaoh and was very important in his leadership, and the knowledge of Ma'at and this consciousness of this greater order was considered one of the highest forms of, I would say, mental capacity. So yeah, those were the last 2 things that I saw.
And maybe this one. Do you see any value in the modern esoteric currents that utilize Egyptian themes?
So on my Substack, I have a series that's called Esoteric Egypt, where I go into a lot of this initiation, how these ancient Egyptian concepts are translated into these modern esoteric principles. And it's a huge field. And I can read the book by Erik Hanung, The Secret Lore of Ancient Egypt. He examines all the different, from theosophy to the Freemasons, to every movement that basically ever claimed ancient Egypt. He goes through all of this. Erik Hanung, that's a very good book as well.
Excellent. So I think I didn't see those questions for some reason. I don't know why. So good. Thank you. Anything else on the course in closing before we disappear? No? Good. Well, then see you all on Sunday. Most all of you, I hope. Thank you very much, Carla.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming and for your questions.